The sound tore through the estate's hallway long before Amal realized it wasn't an explosion but a door slammed with the finality of something breaking between them. Her pulse lurched, scattering the fragile hope she had carried like a trembling flame through the morning's uneasy quiet. She had come prepared for answers, maybe even sorrow, but not for the shock of being shut out before she could speak. Rafi stood at the far end of the corridor, motionless, his hand still hovering over the brass knob as though he couldn't believe he'd closed her out either. Light from the high window carved harsh angles across his face, revealing a tension that aged him in ways grief alone never could. He didn't speak, didn't move, as if one breath might unravel everything he was holding together. Rafi, Amal said, the name cracking out of her. Talk to me. He turned his back. Such a small movement, quiet, almost polite, yet it jolted her harder than the boom that started all this. She stepped forward, refusing to let him vanish into the estate's dim corners. The air smelled of old cedar and an unsettling metallic chill, as if the walls braced for a storm no one could see. You asked me to come, she reminded, steadying her breath. I shouldn't have, he said. His voice was frayed, worn thin by secrets. I thought I could explain. But there's nothing left to explain. Don't lie, she said, sharper than she intended. He flinched, a tiny involuntary betrayal of all he was trying to hide. You think I wanted this? He asked, still refusing to face her. You think I wanted to be the one who ruined everything? You haven't ruined anything. Not unless you walk away now. He gave a hollow laugh. I walked away months ago. You're just the only one stubborn enough to follow. The words cut, but she didn't back down. She closed the distance until only a breath separated them. I'm not here to save you. I'm here because I need the truth. What did you do? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me? This time he looked at her, and the rawness in his eyes nearly undid her. Because if you knew, he whispered, you'd never forgive me. She heard tragedy in that confession, a looming shape beneath his restraint. Forgiveness isn't what I want, she said softly. Truth is. Rafi swallowed, shoulders tightening. The truth is that I kept something from you, something you should have known before you ever loved me. Her palms tingled. Tell me. You're not ready. You don't get to decide that, she said, voice trembling with conviction rather than fear. She saw shame, regret, and something darker shadowing his expression. My family, he began. You know how complicated things have become since the estate's inheritance shifted. But you don't know why. He took a shaking breath. The inheritance wasn't supposed to be mine. Amal frowned. Your father named you. Because he was forced to. The word froze her. Forced? By whom? And why? Before she could ask, he stepped back as if more honesty might tear him apart. There are choices, he said quietly, that bind a person long before they even know they've been chosen. My father made a choice for me, and for you. For me, she breathed. He pressed a hand to his forehead. You were never meant to be dragged into this. I thought I could keep you separate. Untouched. But the moment he died, the moment the will was read, everything changed. Amal's heartbeat surged painfully. What did your father do? Rafi hesitated. Then, like a man surrendering to a wave that could no longer be resisted, he spoke. He arranged something. Something final. Something that ties you to this estate more than it ties me. That makes no sense. I know, he said, voice thin. Because once I say it, it becomes real. And once it's real, you'll understand why I tried to drive you away. Amal reached for his hand. He jerked but didn't pull free. Whatever it is, we face it together. We promised. Some promises, he murmured, were never ours to make. Silence thickened between them. Amal felt the shift, subtle but unmistakable, a tremor in the air as if the estate itself waited for a truth heavy enough to crack the floor beneath them. Rafi, she whispered gentler now, what did your father bind me to? He met her eyes, and the fear there was not for himself. It was for her. The night he died, he said slowly, he left a letter. Not for me. His breath caught. For you. A letter? Amal felt the shock pulse through her. What did it say? I haven't read it, he admitted. I couldn't. But he claimed you already knew the truth. That you agreed to something years before we ever loved each other. Her stomach dropped. Agreed to what? Rafi looked as though the answer scorched him. To become the next heir. The corridor seemed to constrict around her. That's impossible, she whispered. I never. He cut her off, agony twisting his voice. He said you did. He said you signed the pact yourself. And if that's true, then everything between us was never ours to choose. The weight of his revelation pressed into her chest, But beneath the shock something fiercer flickered, a refusal to accept a destiny written without her consent. She stepped toward him, feeling the floorboards shift under her feet as though the estate itself listened. "If this pact exists," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, "someone forged my fate and yours, long before either of us understood the cost. But that doesn't mean we surrender to it." Rafi's expression wavered, torn between dread and a hope he no longer trusted. She felt the air tighten, warning her nothing was finished. Before she could respond, before breath could return, another sound echoed through the estate. A second slam. Not a door. A lock. Boom. The carriage wheels struck the cobblestones with a relentless, unforgiving rhythm, echoing like a drumbeat of judgment across the sleepy countryside. Lady Aria clutched the edge of her shawl, its fine wool failing to shield her from the chill that had settled into her bones, a frost born of humiliation, of abandonment, and of a world that had deemed her unworthy. Each bump of the road seemed to mock her, each hollow thud a reminder that the life she had known, the life she had believed in, was no longer hers to claim. Her heart throbbed with the dull ache of betrayal, yet beneath the despair lingered a faint ember of defiance. She would not vanish quietly. Not yet. The gates of the Hawthorne estate appeared through a silver haze, their wrought iron arches gleaming faintly under the diffused morning light. Even from a distance, the estate exuded a quiet dignity, one uncorrupted by the gossip and cruelty of London's drawing rooms. It was a sanctuary in waiting, and Aria, though hesitant, felt the first flicker of something she had not known in weeks: hope. The carriage door opened with a practiced squeal, and she stepped onto the gravel path, boots crunching against tiny stones, the sound sharp against the hush of the surrounding gardens. Her breath curled in small clouds, and the chill seemed to chase away the last traces of city grime and public shame. Duke Alastair Hawthorne awaited her on the wide, columned terrace. His tall form cut a reassuring figure against the soft gray sky, his coat pristine despite the drizzle that had begun to fall. His eyes, the color of storm-tossed seas, met hers immediately, and in them she discerned a quiet constancy, a shield of patience and understanding she had longed for but scarcely believed could exist. He offered no flourish of ceremony, no forced gallantry, but a simple bow and an earnest, measured greeting. "Lady Aria," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of a hearth in winter. "You honor us with your presence despite the circumstances." The words did not erase her shame, yet they wrapped around her as if to protect a fragile bloom. She curtsied faintly, careful not to let the tremor in her hands betray the storm inside. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice quivering. Thank you for receiving me." Alastair gestured toward the great doorway of the estate. "Come inside. You will find no prying eyes here, only the quiet dignity that is due to every guest, and especially to one who has suffered wrongs not of her making." His phrasing struck a chord. In London, dignity had been stripped from her like a fragile garment torn in the press of a crowd. Here at last it seemed she might reclaim some measure of it. Inside, the warmth of the estate enveloped her, the scent of polished wood mingling with faint traces of lavender. Servants moved silently, their deferential glances acknowledging her presence without question, as if her arrival had already been woven into the fabric of the household. Alastair led her to a small chamber overlooking the gardens, a room softened by sunlight through gauzy curtains. On the dressing table, freshly clipped roses awaited, their petals delicate and pink, a silent testament to care and thoughtfulness. Aria's fingers brushed the blooms and a shiver passed through her, not from the cold but from the realization that someone, somewhere, had preserved gentleness for her despite the harshness of the world. Days passed with measured rhythm. The estate offered refuge, yet it could not shield her from the tendrils of scandal that crept even to the quiet countryside. Letters arrived, some polite, others venomous, and each bore the sting of society's judgment. The gossip from London, about her forced separation, her husband's declarations, and the whispered insinuations regarding her time under the Duke's roof, was a storm that followed her like an invisible spectre. Each envelope that arrived in the tidy hands of the house steward brought a rush of dread, the inked words a reminder that reputation, once tarnished, clung with tenacity. Yet in the midst of that storm, Alastair remained a constant. He moved among his books, the estate, and the gardens with a quiet efficiency, yet always with an eye toward her comfort. He would leave small tokens, books of poetry carefully wrapped, left on her desk, a shawl draped across her chair when evening brought the damp chill of rain, or a tray of tea placed near the window where sunlight lingered. Each gesture, understated and careful, spoke volumes more than the gilded speeches of London ever could. Aria, though grateful, was cautious. Society had taught her suspicion, and experience had honed her fear of vulnerability. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension that had been coiled within her began to loosen. She noticed the soft inflection in Alistair's tone when he inquired after her comfort. She noticed the patience in his expression as she stumbled over words, faltering under the weight of shame and uncertainty. She noticed the steadying warmth of his hand when, on a particularly stormy afternoon, he offered support as she slipped near the terrace steps. And yet, with each small kindness came whispers, rumors drifting like smoke through the corridors of the countryside. Neighboring estates, once distant and polite, now spoke in tones of veiled accusation. "The Duke shelters her. What manner of impropriety is this?" Letters arrived that spoke of curious eyes and raised brows. Society, relentless even in the fields far from London, tested her fortitude. Alistair addressed it only once, quietly but with unmistakable authority. "Do not let the whispers of others dictate your worth, Lady Aria. The world is cruel to those who suffer and crueler still to those it misjudges. Here your dignity remains intact." His words, spoken with sincerity, held a gravity that made her chest ache. She understood, perhaps for the first time in weeks, that honor was not only about appearances. It was a quiet conviction, held within and affirmed by those who truly cared. Amid these days of tentative refuge, the first hints of a deeper connection began to surface. Walks through the estate's gardens revealed the richness of silence shared between them. A glance at the way the light caught the petals of early blooms, a subtle smile exchanged over a stray bird fluttering in the hedge, a gentle remark about the weather or a passing thought of a poem. Each small exchange was a thread, weaving a tapestry of trust and, perhaps, the faintest glimmer of something unspoken yet undeniable. One evening, as the sky burned a rose gold over the horizon, Alistair left a single rose on her writing desk, accompanied by a note in his precise, flowing script. "Even in the harshest winter, the garden persists. So must we in courage and in hope." Aria's fingers lingered on the paper, tracing the elegant curves of each letter, and her chest swelled with a complex mix of gratitude, longing, and the trembling recognition that she was not entirely alone in the world. Yet the refuge was fragile. The estate, magnificent and steadfast, could not fully shield her from the reach of scandal or the lingering shadow of her husband's authority. A new letter arrived one morning, sealed with the insignia of London's rigid society. Its contents, demanding her immediate return to the life that had betrayed her, were an invisible weight pressing upon her shoulders. The words were cold, authoritative, and unyielding: "Return at once or risk the ruin of all you hold dear." She sank into the cushioned window seat, clutching the envelope as if it were both a weapon and a burden. Alistair, entering quietly, caught sight of her distress. His voice, low and steady, filled the room. "Do not fear the chains others would place upon you. They have no claim to your heart, nor to the life you are yet to claim for yourself." Aria's gaze lifted, and in his eyes she glimpsed something more than kindness, a fierce protectiveness that both comforted and unsettled her. She realized, with a jolt that made her pulse catch, that she was at a crossroads. One path led back to the life that had condemned her, the other forward, into uncertain loyalty, tentative trust, and perhaps she dared to imagine the possibility of love. The rain fell harder against the window panes, tapping a staccato rhythm that mirrored the tension thrumming through her veins. Outside, the estate remained tranquil, a steadfast bastion against the storm, yet within its walls decisions pressed upon her like the heavy cloak of expectation and consequence. She folded the letter, smoothing its creases with deliberate care. "I will not go back," she said, her voice a fragile whisper that grew steadier as it echoed in the chamber. "Not yet." Alistair's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Then we shall face what comes together," he replied. His words held both promise and challenge, a reminder that refuge alone was not enough, that the next trials were imminent, and that whatever path they chose would be watched, judged, and tested by forces far beyond their walls. And yet, in that moment, beneath the relentless drizzle and the shadow of scandal, Aria allowed herself the faintest, trembling smile. She did not know what the morrow would bring, but she knew this. Here, at the edge of despair and hope, she had found an anchor. And anchors, she now understood, could hold even in the fiercest storms. A sudden knock at the chamber door interrupted the fragile calm. Aria froze, the blood draining from her face, as a servant appeared, bearing a letter whose seal bore the unmistakable mark of London's relentless judgment. Her hands shook as she took it, knowing instinctively that whatever lay within would challenge everything she had begun to believe about safety, trust, and the fragile possibilities of her heart. Boom! The thunder tore through the night sky like a judgment long delayed, rattling the window panes of the Hawthorne estate and shaking the fragile calm Aria had so painstakingly cultivated. Rain streamed in silver threads down the tall windows, smearing the view of the gardens into streaks of shadow and light. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, heart hammering, as though the storm outside mirrored the tempest she carried within. Tonight, the weight of her past, her shame, and the relentless letters from London had finally breached her defenses. The envelope lay on the writing desk, untouched, its wax seal gleaming under the flicker of candlelight. She had stared at it for hours, willing the courage to rise, to break the spell of fear that kept her rooted to her chair. Each second of hesitation felt like a lifetime, yet she knew that to leave it unread was to surrender power to a world that had already taken too much from her. Finally, trembling but resolved, she broke the seal. The letter slipped from her fingers and unfurled like a revelation. Lady Aria, it began, your absence from London has not gone unnoticed. The estate, the alliances, your reputation. Everything hinges upon your immediate return. You will comply. The words were cold, surgical, and devoid of compassion. They carried the authority of a husband who believed his judgment immutable, and they ignited a conflagration of anger, humiliation, and fear within her. She crushed the paper in her hands, letting it fall to the floor with a quiet snap that sounded louder than the storm outside. You cannot order me as though I were property, she whispered to the empty chamber, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and sorrow. The truth, once buried beneath layers of courtesy and restraint, clawed its way to the surface. She was no longer the obedient wife society demanded, nor the fragile ornament her husband had proclaimed herself to be. She was Aria, wronged but not defeated. Footsteps on the stairs drew her attention. Alistair appeared in the doorway, the flicker of candlelight outlining the sharp lines of his face. His eyes, stormy and relentless, held concern tempered by something deeper, an almost imperceptible wariness, as if he understood the fragility of her courage and yet trusted her strength to endure. You have read it, he stated softly, not a question but an acknowledgement. His presence was grounding, a tether to reality amidst the chaos of her emotions. Yes, she said, voice breaking. And I will not go back. I cannot. I will not. Her hands shook as she clenched them against her chest. I have been abandoned, humiliated, and blamed for the impossible. I will not allow him, or anyone, to dictate the rest of my life. Alistair moved closer, leaving a respectful distance, yet close enough that she could feel the subtle warmth emanating from him. You are more than what they claim you are, he said quietly, and far stronger than you believe. His words brushed against her like a promise, the quiet weight of them sinking into her bones. Aria's gaze fell to the floor, her chest heaving. I fear what comes next. London does not forgive, and whispers travel faster than truth. Then let us control what we can, he replied, his tone steady. Here, under this roof, your reputation is yours to reclaim. There is no judgment beyond these walls, only the truth of who you are. He extended his hand, a simple yet profound gesture of trust and partnership. Aria hesitated, the memory of countless betrayals and cruel gazes weighing upon her. Yet the sincerity in his eyes anchored her, and she placed her hand lightly into his, a small but deliberate act of surrender to something wholly different from fear. The storm raged outside, but within the chamber an odd stillness settled over them, punctuated only by the occasional clap of thunder and the soft rustle of candle flames. Words unspoken hung between them like fragile glass, delicate and dangerous, yet impossible to ignore. Aria's mind, usually so disciplined and wary, faltered, letting thoughts wander to the rare moments of comfort Alistair had provided. Garden walks, quiet conversations, the small acts of care that seemed insignificant to an outsider but monumental in their intimacy. You have given me safety, she whispered, voice trembling with unaccustomed vulnerability. But I am not certain I can accept it fully, knowing the world outside will not understand. Alistair's eyes softened, and he knelt slightly, lowering himself to meet her gaze. Then accept it not for them but for yourself. You are deserving of care and of peace, irrespective of their judgment. Let them speak. We will act as if their voices are distant echoes, for they hold no dominion here. She drew a slow, shuddering breath, the weight in her chest easing just enough to allow a spark of hope to kindle. It was a fragile light, yes, but one that promised possibility. And what of my past? She asked, her tone barely above a whisper. Can peace truly exist when the shadows of disgrace cling to me still? Alistair's hand tightened gently over hers. The past may haunt, but it does not define. Even in tragedy, one can find a path to renewal. And sometimes, the heart discovers truths that the mind cannot foresee. His words carried a weight that made her chest ache, an emotional gravity that tethered her to the moment with more force than any fear could muster. Aria's lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. She was acutely aware of the closeness, of the safety and restraint in Alistair's presence. Each glance, each gesture, seemed laden with meaning, as if even silence could convey promises beyond the reach of spoken words. She realized with a jolt that she was no longer just seeking refuge from scandal. She was beginning to understand the quiet, compelling gravity of affection that had begun to root itself in her heart. Hours passed in a careful equilibrium. The storm gradually abated, leaving the estate drenched but serene, the air fragrant with rain-soaked earth and the faint perfume of the garden's last blooms. Alistair remained at her side, attending to small needs, bringing a cup of tea, adjusting the fire's warmth, ensuring her comfort without intrusion. Each act, seemingly trivial, spoke volumes more than any declaration could. In this meticulous care, Aria found herself letting go of a fraction of her guardedness, allowing gratitude and tentative trust to take root. Then, just as the last light of dusk filtered through the curtains, a distant knock echoed through the chamber. Aria froze, the ghost of fear clawing at her spine. Alistair's eyes narrowed, recognizing the danger before it fully materialized. "Stay here," he said softly, though his tone carried the weight of warning. The knock came again, insistent and deliberate. Aria's fingers instinctively gripped his sleeve, a silent plea for protection and reassurance. He moved toward the door with measured calm, leaving her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could hear the subtle rustle of paper, the faint scrape of a seal breaking. And then, in the hush between one heartbeat and the next, a voice, cold, precise, unmistakable, reached her ears. "Lady Aria," it said, clipped and formal, "your absence from London has been noted. You will answer for it." The sound made her stomach twist with dread. The world she had hoped to escape had found her, crossing the distance between cities and estates to intrude upon the sanctuary Alistair had so carefully provided. She felt the familiar pulse of anxiety, the old terror of being measured and judged, returning with renewed vigor. Alistair's hand found hers again, fingers intertwining with a quiet firmness that grounded her. "We shall meet this intrusion," he murmured, his voice low but unwavering. "Whatever comes, you will not face it alone. The choice remains ours, together." Aria exhaled shakily, aware that the fragile peace of the evening had shifted. The letters, the voices of scandal, the world's judgment, all of it was converging upon her sanctuary. And yet, for the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of courage that was not fear but a quiet, determined resolve. She straightened, shoulders lifted despite the tension in her chest, and looked toward the approaching threat. The storm outside had passed, leaving the estate glistening and cold, yet the real storm, the one carried in human hands and inked words, was only beginning. And in that moment, as the visitor's presence drew near, Aria understood the magnitude of the choice before her: to cower beneath the weight of accusation, or to rise and claim the life, and perhaps the heart, that might still be hers. The door creaked. Boom. The sound of hooves striking the gravel path shattered the delicate quiet of the Hawthorne estate, a harsh percussion that seemed to shake the very air with urgency and threat. Lady Aria's pulse quickened, every nerve taut with anticipation. The storm that had passed hours ago had left the gardens glistening, but the approaching carriage carried a weight far heavier than rain. She sensed, before a single word reached the drawing room, that the world beyond the estate's protective walls had found her, and with it, the relentless demands of reputation, duty, and vindictive authority. Alistair stood near the hearth, calm and imposing, yet the brief shadow of tension flickered across his features as the carriage drew up outside. His eyes met hers, steady, unwavering, and she drew a trembling breath, finding strength in the quiet certainty of his presence. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we shall face it together." The drawing-room door opened to reveal the figure she had feared. Her husband, composed yet cold, stepping into the warm glow of the firelight with the practiced arrogance of one accustomed to command. He moved with the precision of a man trained in control, but there was a rigidity to his posture, a hint of unease beneath the surface, as if he sensed the rules of engagement had shifted beyond his favor. "Lady Aria," he intoned, his voice clipped, carrying the formal cadence of accusation. "You have absconded from your duties and your continued absence has caused complications. You will return to London immediately to fulfill what is required of you." Aria's fingers tightened around the edge of her gown, her voice low but steady. "I am no longer bound by duties that demand my disgrace. I will not return to a household that cast me out, nor to a man who deemed me unworthy before even giving me the chance to prove myself. Her words carried a calm authority, measured yet unyielding, and the firelight caught the sharpness in her eyes. Her husband's gaze flickered, betraying a flicker of irritation and surprise. "You presume to speak of worth? Your position, your station, and your reputation are at my discretion." Alistair stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Aria and her husband, his posture formal yet unshakable. "No," he said, voice steady and firm, carrying the weight of both law and conscience. "Your wife's honor is hers alone, and it will not be dictated by coercion or fear. The lady has suffered injustice enough without further burden." A hush fell over the room, heavy with the weight of confrontation. Aria drew in a measured breath, feeling the rush of courage that comes only when one acknowledges the full magnitude of their own strength. "I will not be commanded by a man who abandoned me in the hour of need," she said, each syllable deliberate. "And I will not be judged for misfortunes not of my making." Her husband's mouth twitched, the first crack in his mask of control. "You speak as though you are free of consequence," he said, though the certainty in his voice had faltered. "The world does not forget." "The world may not forget, but I do not live for it," she interrupted, her voice rising, sharp as a bell yet tempered with dignity. "I live for what is right, for truth, and for the life I choose to build. And in this I am not alone." Her eyes met Alistair's, and in that moment, the unspoken bond between them solidified into a quiet defiance that radiated through the chamber. Her husband took a step closer, hand twitching toward a letter he had brought, the paper crisp with the authority of London's society. "The letters, your absence, your actions. They bear no weight here," Alistair interjected, voice controlled yet firm. "The lady is under my protection. Any further claims of impropriety or defiance will be addressed with the truth, not with coercion." Aria felt a rush of warmth at his words, a surge of gratitude that mingled with the pulse of fear still thrumming in her veins. This was not a man offering empty comfort. This was a partner, a shield, and perhaps, she dared to think, the first true ally she had known in months. Her husband's eyes narrowed, realizing that the battle he had expected to win by threat alone was slipping from his grasp. "You will regret this," he said, voice low and dangerous, though the confidence behind it had waned. "You will see that defiance has its price." Aria's lips curved in a faint, controlled smile, a gesture of both defiance and recognition of the truth he could not comprehend. She had already paid the price, endured the shame, and emerged stronger. "Regret," she said softly, "belongs to those who abandon and misjudge, not to those who reclaim their dignity." A tension hung between them, palpable and electric, until her husband, seeing no path to immediate victory, turned sharply and departed, leaving a trail of cold authority behind him. The drawing room seemed to exhale with relief, the warmth of the fire filling the silence left by his departure. Aria's knees weakened, and Alistair moved to support her, his hand resting lightly at her elbow. "You were magnificent," he said, voice low, nearly a whisper, carrying both admiration and something deeper, a tenderness she had begun to recognize but not yet name. "You have faced what few could endure with such composure." Aria drew a shuddering breath, her body still trembling with adrenaline and lingering fear. "It is not composure," she murmured. "It is necessity. I cannot, will not, be subject to injustice again." Alistair's gaze softened, and he leaned just slightly closer, careful to maintain the propriety of the moment, yet impossible to ignore in its intimacy. "Then we move forward," he said quietly. "Together. Whatever storms may come, you will not face them alone." Her heart responded to the gravity in his tone, a subtle echo of hope mingled with a recognition she could not yet fully name. The firelight danced across his features, illuminating the steadfast determination etched into his visage. She realized that for the first time she was seeing not only protection but the promise of devotion, a careful, deliberate affection that required neither scandal nor grand declaration to assert its power. As the evening settled, the first signs of her transformation became evident. The lines of worry around her eyes softened slightly, her posture straightened with quiet confidence, and her voice, though still tempered by caution, carried an authority born of experience and endurance. She had been tested, humiliated, and abandoned, yet here she stood, no longer merely surviving but beginning to assert the life she deserved. Alistair guided her to the window once more, where the storm had left the gardens glistening under the soft light of a crescent moon. The roses, drenched but unbowed, mirrored her own resilience. He placed a gentle hand over hers, a simple contact that spoke of solidarity, protection, and perhaps, the first stirrings of affection that neither dared to name aloud. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice barely more than a breath. The quiet strength that lingers even after darkness? Aria nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the moonlit blooms. I feel it, she whispered. And I feel possibility. Even in the shadow of all that has been taken from me, there is room for something new. Something real. He did not speak immediately, letting the moment linger, a careful suspension of time that acknowledged both danger and promise. The unspoken weight of what lay ahead pressed upon them, yet for a fleeting instant, the certainty of mutual respect and emerging trust filled the space between them like a balm. A subtle creak from the hallway reminded them that the outside world still existed, that threats and challenges had not vanished, only receded. Yet the fear that had haunted her days in London seemed diminished, tempered by the protective presence of someone who had chosen to stand with her, not over her. As they withdrew from the window, a soft knock at the door startled them both. Aria's breath caught. Alistair's eyes met hers, calm yet alert. She felt the familiar pulse of anxiety, but beneath it, a new thread of courage intertwined with hope. Whatever awaited beyond the door, she knew with a quiet conviction that she would not face it alone. And then the knock came again, deliberate, insistent, as if it carried the weight of the world itself. Aria's fingers brushed against Alistair's hand, finding reassurance in its steady warmth. She understood with sudden clarity that the moments ahead would demand all the courage she could muster, and perhaps more than she had ever imagined. Boom. The morning cannon from the nearby training grounds rolled across the countryside, a deep and commanding sound that seemed to shake the earth beneath the Hawthorne estate. Lady Aria stood by the window, the first light of dawn spilling over the gardens and illuminating the dew-laden roses, their petals trembling like fragile hearts beneath the sun. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of nights spent in uncertainty and days haunted by whispers finally beginning to lift. The world beyond the estate, the world that had sought to dictate her worth, was returning, and she would face it not as a fragile, cast-aside wife, but as a woman who had endured, survived, and reclaimed her dignity. Alistair stood behind her, silent, yet present in every subtle shift of posture, every careful movement of his hand toward the fire that flickered nearby. His presence was a quiet anchor, steadying her against the currents of fear and expectation. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a touch that spoke not only of protection but of a partnership forged in trial. The day begins, he said softly, and with it, the reckoning we have prepared for. Are you ready? Aria's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, the morning mist curling around the edges of the gardens like a protective veil. I am, she whispered, a tremor beneath her words betraying the deep wells of courage she had drawn upon. I will not falter. I will not yield to those who sought to control me. The carriage approached again, its polished wheels glinting in the nascent sunlight. The figure who stepped down was no longer the cold, calculating man who had issued commands weeks before. There was hesitation in his step, the slightest falter of arrogance that betrayed uncertainty. Aria met his eyes, unwavering, and saw the subtle recognition that she had changed, that she was no longer the wife he could manipulate through fear or authority. I have come to discuss your return, he said, his voice measured, though the edge of irritation could not be entirely masked. The estate, our obligations, your position. You speak of position as though it defines me, she interrupted, voice steady and resolute. But I define myself, and that definition includes dignity, honesty, and the life I have chosen to build here with those who honor me. Her gaze shifted to Alistair, and for a fleeting moment, the warmth in his eyes mirrored the courage swelling in her chest. Her husband's lips tightened, the words he had prepared failing to land. And what of the scandal? The whispers that follow you? Aria's chin lifted, the first true smile of defiance curving her lips. Let them whisper. Their words carry no weight where truth and love prevail. She stepped closer to Alistair, the subtle unity between them a silent declaration. I will not return to a life governed by fear and false judgment. I have found my strength elsewhere, and it does not lie with you. The subtle authority of her tone, tempered with dignity and unyielding composure, left her husband momentarily speechless. His eyes flickered from her to Alistair and back again, realizing that the stakes had shifted irreversibly. Aria was no longer a subject to command, she was a force shaped by experience, a woman whose worth could not be diminished by betrayal or societal expectation. Alistair's voice, calm and deliberate, carried the finality of judgment without cruelty. It is time to acknowledge what is true. Lady Aria has been wronged. Any attempt to coerce or command her further will not only fail but expose the injustice that has been done. The matter rests now with her choice, not yours. A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Aria felt the quiet hum of anticipation thrumming through the estate, as if the walls themselves held their collective breath in witness to the confrontation. She knew with sudden clarity that this was the moment where courage and truth collided, where her voice and her heart would finally dictate the course of her life. Her husband's jaw tightened, but he took a deliberate step back, acknowledging the subtle power shift he could not alter. "So be it," he said finally, voice low. "You choose your own path. But do not mistake independence for immunity from consequence." Aria met his gaze, unwavering. "Independence does not demand permission, nor does it fear judgment. The consequences are mine to bear, as are the rewards." He inclined his head slightly, a begrudging recognition of her resolve, and turned away, leaving the estate's grounds with a subdued dignity that could not erase the humiliation of defeat. The morning air seemed to expand, carrying with it a quiet triumph, yet the gravity of the moment was tempered by the knowledge that the world beyond would continue to watch, to speculate, and to whisper. Alistair closed the distance between them, and his hand found hers once more, fingers entwining with a gentle yet unmistakable firmness. "You have done more than endure," he said softly. "You have claimed what is rightfully yours. Your courage has not gone unnoticed, not by me, and certainly not by those whose hearts matter." Aria's chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax against the weight of shared conviction and loyalty. "And you?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. "Have you endured as well?" Alistair's gaze softened, a rare vulnerability touching the edges of his otherwise composed expression. "I have," he admitted quietly. "For the sake of seeing you safe, for the sake of witnessing the truth of your spirit. And now, I may hope to share in the life that follows." The estate seemed to breathe with them, the sunlight glinting off dew-drenched roses, the distant sound of birds carrying a gentle rhythm that matched the steady pulse of their hearts. Aria realized that this morning, this quiet triumph, was more than victory over past humiliation. It was a reclamation of possibility, of choice, of the rarest of gifts, freedom tempered by love. Days turned to weeks, and within the walls of the Hawthorne estate, the world outside seemed a distant memory. Letters of inquiry and accusation arrived, but Aria received them with calm detachment, her confidence and newfound authority a shield no longer reliant on Alistair's protection, though it was strengthened immeasurably by his presence. Together, they navigated the delicate balance of society's scrutiny and the quiet, profound intimacy that had blossomed in shared adversity. One evening, as twilight draped the gardens in muted purples and golds, Aria discovered a secret she had not yet dared to confront. A subtle, undeniable flutter, a warmth beneath her ribs that spoke of life burgeoning unseen. Her fingers rested gently against her abdomen, breath catching with a mixture of wonder, fear, and joy. The miracle she had longed for, the proof that her worth had never been in question, revealed itself quietly, yet unmistakably. Alistair, noticing her sudden stillness, approached with careful concern. "What is it?" he asked softly. I think," she whispered, voice barely audible, "that life has granted us a gift. Something that is wholly ours, untouched by scandal or misjudgment. I carry it." Her words trailed, fragile yet radiant. He took her hands in his, eyes reflecting awe and reverence. "Then it is indeed a miracle," he murmured, voice hushed with reverence. "A testament to resilience, to hope, and to the truth of who you are. Together we will protect it, cherish it, and build a life worthy of its arrival." Tears welled unbidden in Aria's eyes, not of sorrow but of profound relief, gratitude, and the pure, quiet joy of vindication. The estate, with its gardens and halls, seemed to pulse with life alongside her, bearing witness to the culmination of trials endured, of trust earned, and of love tenderly, deliberately nurtured. The days that followed were marked by careful planning, laughter tinged with nervous anticipation, and the subtle, growing intimacy of shared secrets and gentle touches. London's whispers continued, but they reached her now as distant echoes, powerless to erode the foundation of life, love, and respect she had reclaimed. Alistair's presence remained a steady current, an unwavering support that neither sought to dominate nor control, but simply to share in the wonder and responsibility of new beginnings. And one quiet morning, as dawn broke over the Hawthorne estate, Lady Aria stood in the garden, the soft light caressing her face, hand resting against the gentle swell of life she now carried. Alistair approached, offering a smile that contained everything unspoken between them, admiration, protection, and the tender beginnings of enduring love. A soft breeze stirred the roses, carrying petals in delicate spirals across the dewy grass. Aria's heart lifted, and for the first time she felt fully, irrevocably, unshakably whole. She had endured humiliation, abandonment, and the cruel judgments of society, yet she stood here, triumphant not through vengeance or confrontation, but through courage, dignity, and the quiet power of truth. And as Alistair's hand brushed hers, warm and steady, she realized that the greatest miracle of all was not the life growing within her, but the life she had claimed for herself, one built on love, trust, and the enduring promise of hope. A distant carriage horn echoed faintly across the morning mist, a reminder that the world still watched, still whispered, still demanded. Yet Aria's smile held a quiet defiance, a luminous certainty that whatever the next challenge, whatever the next storm, she would meet it not as a frightened wife, but as a woman fully alive, fully cherished, and fully free.